Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar that we're going to review Managing Nonconformances and Corrective Actions. My name is Cindy Haight. I am a sales representative here at SGS, and we have Sabrina Ippolito as our presenter and subject matter expert. There we are. We're going to keep our cameras off today. But Sabrina is a classically trained biochemist, a certified lead auditor that ensures organizations maintain compliance in a realm of different industries, certifications, and standards spanning pharmaceutical, cosmetics, and general manufacturing. She's directed, overseen, and improved several quality systems to reduce deficiencies and to increase product flow across the US and Canada. She is affiliated with the Professional Order of Chemists of Quebec, as well as ASQ, the American Society for Quality in the US. Again, I'm Cindy Haight. I've been with SGS just over 2.5 years at this point. I work with customers to help bring them under certification for ISO standards, 9001, 14,001, etc. I don't want to list them all to you, but I've been in the TIC industry, that's testing, inspection, certification, for over 20 years, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. We're going to go into the content here in just a moment. I just wanted to show you a little bit of information about SGS. You can see we've been in business for a long time, since 1878. We started as a marine inspection company, and today we have been in business for over 140 years, and we have 2,600 offices and labs across the world. We are the #1 world leader in the TIC industry, with nearly 100,000 employees and 7 focus areas for our services. We have a global network, as I mentioned. We have presence in, I think, 140 countries. We value our high level of quality that we provide in our service to our customers. We bring incredible industry experience with our amazing auditor team. We aspire for digital innovation with our systems and are very focused on our corporate sustainability journey. Here's a little bit about our group. Sabrina and I work under the Business Assurance Group here at SGS, and those are the services, some of the services we offer. Of course, certification. We have training through SGS Academy for several ISO standards and regulations and all kinds of different categories. We'll share some more details about that toward the end of the presentation today. We do have a system, it's called Seymour, which is our supply chain risk management service. And we also have a wide range of sustainability assurance services, consulting services through SGS Mainpoint, and also we can support your medical device regulatory needs. And here is our agenda for today. I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Sabrina to take over. Please know that there is a Q&A area, so please feel free to post your questions there, and we will spend some time at the end of the session to answer your questions. If we can't get to your questions, we will email you as a follow-up after the session sometime next week. And we will have some poll questions today, so you can click right on your answer and participate in the poll, and there's going to be a survey, so please enjoy yourself, enjoy the content, give us your feedback at the end of the session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon for another session. Sabrina?
Thank you so much, Cindy. That's such an awesome welcome. And I'm not quite sure exactly how much fun we can have with the non-conformances, but we'll try. That'll be the focus today. So actually what kind of brought up this topic, and one of the reasons why I thought it would be interesting for us to discuss it, is because most organizations, from what I have seen just from doing a couple of audits, or a couple of 100 audits by now, is that some companies are having a very difficult time in addressing the differences between when to open up a corrective action or when to open up a non-conformance. So you'll see in part one of today's webinar, today's learning event, we're going to be talking about non-conformances. Specifically, there's one slide there where I'd like for us to spend a bit of time to look at what are the guidelines for opening up a car versus that of a non-conformance. And hopefully it's going to help shed some light and give you some perspective as well. In addition, we're going to be defining nonconformances and their classifications. We're going to look at some key aspects of nonconformances, sources of requirements, or essentially what are the sources that initiate a nonconformance or that may initiate a nonconformance. We then have a brief overview of some common nonconformances and then how we would maybe document a potential nonconformance that comes our way. The second part of the webinar will be focusing on corrective actions. Here we're going to define corrective actions, look at some key aspects of corrective actions, and we will end off with a type of corrective action or what one can expect a proper corrective action, how we would fill a document out. So I'll take you through one of the nonconformances, and that's being addressed through a corrective action and how we can fill out a document. I know that there were some learners in previous webinars that expressed how they'd like to see a something documented or how that process might look like when it's complete. So without further ado, we will start today with our first poll question. So true or false, nonconformances and corrective actions are exactly the same thing. I'll give you a couple of minutes, maybe more a couple of seconds, because we do have a session that is jammed packed today. That's exactly right. Fantastic. So no, they're not exactly the same thing. Wonderful. I don't think I have anything else to add on this one. You did great. This is your second poll question. So think about a negative situation that occurred within the context of your organization, so within your company. Did you have an easy time identifying if you should initiate a nonconformance report or a corrective action report? So essentially, think of something that happened within your company, an event that occurred, obviously a negative event. Did you have an easy time saying, okay, this is a nonconformance that I have to open, or no, this is in fact a corrective action I have to open? Okay, let's see. Okay, very good. I see that the majority of you, based on this poll question, have said that you basically have one system that combines nonconformances and corrective actions. I'm beginning to see a lot more of this happening in industry. But yet, some companies still have, okay, this is nonconformance, or no, this is a corrective action process that needs to be initiated. For those of you that are saying that, no, they both sound the same to me, you wouldn't be the first ones to say this either. So hopefully I'll be able to shed some light and provide you guidelines on this slide. Now, this is to be taken as a grain of salt. Okay, so this is more of a guide. Does that mean that this is absolute? No, it does not mean that. It means that based on what I have seen and based on colleagues and how, and even from accreditation bureaus on how we're expected to perceive this information, these are the guidelines that we can follow. Again, they're recommendations, they're not obligations, okay? So what I've typically seen organizations do as they relate to nonconformances is that they're closing off nonconformances within 30 days of the event occurring. Anything more than 30 days, or if they find that if I'm going to address the situation that occurred and I want to really get to the nitty gritty, to the root cause of the problem, then corrective actions would be 30 days or more. If you have process, if your process for nonconformances, for instance, to close off a nonconformance is within 45 days, in that case, your corrective actions goes and pick up the last day of the nonconformance, so 45 days and more. I've seen some organizations, all depending on how big they are, depending on the complexities of their processes, of their systems, the number of people that have to sign off on documentation. In some cases, I've seen nonconformances that may stay open for a period of 90 days. In that case, the corrective actions is 90 days or more. That's when they would initiate a CAR or a corrective action process. So let's look at some details about this. When is it that we open up a nonconformance? Well, a nonconformance is a requirement that is not fulfilled. So for instance, we might have this, let's say if we're looking internally within the context of our company, okay? If we look at our receiving dockets, our bill of material, maybe not necessarily the bill of material, but our packing slip, for instance, if we're looking at any documents from receiving, that those specs are not being met, whether it's quantity that's off, whether it's the product itself that wasn't ordered, that wasn't purchased, or it could be, for instance, there is a process internally that you cannot do, and therefore maybe painting, you have to send it externally for another organization to do it. You bring it back and you find that there are still scratches on the surface. The color is not the color that you wanted. The thickness of the paint does not meet specification. This is an area where you would raise a nonconformance. Maybe in terms of production, maybe you are producing a product. Maybe you're producing a shampoo. You'll notice that in kitting or in compounding and manufacturing, there's an issue. You happen to be starting to combine all of your ingredients together in a mixing bowl. And instead of the batch record, which reads that you should have 54 kilos of ingredient A, you have 45 kilos of ingredient A. Sometimes there is a mix up in numbers, right? So in this case, this is a place where you would say, okay, I open up a non-conformance. In inspection or testing, another area where you might have a non-conformance. In this case, you would initiate an NCR, as you would for shipping. Maybe your shipping documentation is not in order, or the documents you would typically have in order for you to ship to your customer, that information is not available. A non-conformance would also be raised there. 80% of non-conformances, you'll notice that there are 5 bullet points there. 4 out of 5, 80% of non-conformances can be stopped internally. That means 20% of non-conformances are usually external to the organization, especially if you have really good systems in place. This is what you should see. From an external perspective, a non-conformance is disguised as a customer complaint, obviously relating to quality. If you're looking at all of your non-conformances in a year and you notice that you have more than 20% of them that are externalized, like that come in form of customer complaint, in that case, you need to double check, or you need to rethink about what is the information that was communicated to people that are in receiving and production, in testing or inspection and shipping, that the non-conformances are, for whatever reason, are being shipped out. So maybe you need to tighten your belts in those areas a little bit more, and that might require some investigation. Corrective actions, on the other hand, you would open up a corrective action report in the event of an audit. And this is any type of an audit. This is an internal audit, which is a first party audit, a customer audit, which is a second party audit, or any type of certification or regulatory audit, which is a third party. In this case, if you happen to get a non-conformance, you do not open a non-conformance report. You have to address any non-conformances that come out from an audit through a corrective action. Maybe you might have a customer complaint and your customer might say, I don't want you addressing my complaint through a non-conformance. I want you to address my complaint from the perspective of a corrective action. In this case, you would open up the CAR instead. If, for instance, you notice that there's a risk, so you know that ISO 9001, one of the add-ons that they did from the 2008 version was risk management. So if you notice that, hey, we have an elevated risk where we need to do something about this, well, understanding the risk, it becomes critical. So in this case, you would open up a corrective action. Any type of changes that are required, and maybe there's a legislative change. While this can also be addressed using a management of change process, for those of you who don't have a management of change process, you can address this through a corrective action. Any trend analysis that you're noticing, you know what, we've been noticing an increase in the non-conformances for materials that we're receiving. You might decide this is a time for you to open up a corrective action and do a little bit more investigating to see what exactly is going on. In addition, you might have process deviations or unplanned deviations, unmet quality objectives. This over here is a big one. Whenever you are documenting or you're communicating the results of quality objectives, but you did not meet the requirements of your quality objectives, a corrective action needs to be initiated. Any field failures as well, any accidents or near misses, those two would result in you opening up a corrective action. So earlier I mentioned some sources of requirements. So what does it mean when we're not meeting a requirement? Well, we've got 4 areas. For instance, anything that's from a regulatory body, if it comes from, for instance, Health Canada or the FDA, or even from your bureau, like for instance, from the area in which the organization is in. So for instance, as I live in Laval, I live in Quebec. In Laval, in my specific area, which is maybe about 15, 20 minutes away from my mother-in-law, in my specific area, I have certain restrictions as it relates to waste. But in my mother-in-law's area, where she's in slightly, about 20 minutes away from me, in her area, her rules and laws and regulations that she needs to abide by as it relates to waste are different than mine. So you also need to think about the borough in which you're in. So it's not just from a national, let's say from a Canadian perspective or from regulations that come from the US, for instance, but you have to look at this holistically too, even in terms of the city that you're in. Think about what are the requirements, the legal requirements, the statutory, the normative requirements that you need to abide by. Any codes of practice. Secondly, we have system standards. So this would be anything certification. So we are going from regulatory now to certification. If you're not meeting minimum requirements of your ISO standards. For instance, we have ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, any one of the standards that are part of the ISO family. Then we have customer contracts. Our customer needs, wants, and expectations. They are third on the totem pole. And we can look at what their requirements are from the perspective of quality agreements. So what are the quality agreements that you have in place with your clients? And are you meeting those minimum requirements? And last but not least, we have it from an organizational perspective. So this is really from the company's lens. So we can look at our organization's quality manual or our processes, our standard operating procedures, our work instructions, specifications that have been brought forth from corporate. Are we meeting those minimum requirements? And if we're not, this is typically where we get our nonconformances. So again, 4 areas. We have regulatory, we've got standards. So from our system standards like ISO 9001, our customer requirements, and then it's from an internal perspective. So like I said, what is a nonconformity? Nonconformity is a non-fulfillment of a requirement. We just saw some of those requirements. If we're not fulfilling any one of those requirements, we are then raising a nonconformity. In addition, if you want to be fancy with the terminology, as long as you are stipulating the terminology that's being used within the context of your management system, there are other words you can use, such as derogation or an unplanned deviation or a discrepancy as well. So these are some key aspects of nonconformances. For those of you who have been or who have attended my webinars in other instances, you'll notice that my webinars, or at least my slides, are very wordy. But this is so that you have something to take home and something for you to think about. So when you are looking at nonconformances, and this goes on for the next 3-4 slides, anything that is described, anything that is in black, so for instance, header information, the description of nonconformances, the references documented. So this could be specifications, they could be standards, any information relating to that. Moving a little bit further, disposition, approval and signatures, and finally closure. Whatever you see in black, this is the minimum information that is required for a non-conformance report. Whatever area you see in gray, we can include those sections for a corrective action as well. Now, like I said, and like you've also mentioned, and like what we saw in the poll, there's some companies that what they've decided to do, which to me makes total sense. What they've decided to do is to have one type of form. And in that type of form, they are addressing the nonconformances and the corrective actions. That's fine too. The only thing that I can sometimes see problematic with that is that we might have what might take, for instance, very limited resources to address a nonconformance. We're now convoluting that system. We're now convoluting, we're rendering it a little bit more complex. Now, if you can say, well, you know, Sabrina, we have our own method and we feel comfortable using that one method where we have, you know, we're addressing nonconformances and corrective actions as an event. And so our event looks at nonconformances and corrective actions. And yes, we are looking at risk. And yes, we do a root cause for everything. Then that's fine too. That is your process. For those of you who have decided to break this off, nonconformances and corrective actions, just bear in mind whatever I have in black, those are the minimum requirements that you need to address when you're addressing a nonconformance. And whatever is in gray, those in addition would be used for the corrective actions as well. Good. So this brings us to our next poll question. I want you to think about your previous ISO 9001 external audits. How many nonconformances would you say your organization receives on average? Give you a couple of more seconds to get some more information. Okay, let's see what you guys said. 1 to 2. Okay, good. All right. Very good, very good. Okay, so for those of you that answer that you do receive non-conformances, I want you to think about, because this is one of the things that us external auditors have to do, is we need to tell you what are the areas that are non-conforming. And this is both, or rather, this is from, let's say, the standards perspective. So let's say within the context of 9001, but also within the context of your own procedures, like your own SOPs, your own work instructions, your own documentation. So what we have seen when we're actually compiling this, because us too, we do trend analysis, we want to know where are areas that most people are having having difficulty with. And based on that difficulty, we like to be able to provide support however we see or however we deem necessary. So one of the things, or rather what we've seen, is that the majority of non-conformances do arise in clause 7 and in clause 8, where we're talking about operations. Clause 7 has to do with support and clause 8 has to do with your operations. So this is really the heart and soul of your organization. So reflect back, think back, and see, is this you? Are you falling in any one of these categories? Okay, awesome. So how do we document a nonconformance? When you are documenting a nonconformance, you need to be able to write your nonconformity statement. So this is you stating the finding in relation to your management system. And this is not just from the perspective of the standard, like something from a standard that you're not doing, but this can also be something that comes from a customer need, want, or expectation that isn't being fulfilled, or something internally. So when you're looking at your procedures or you're looking at your work instructions, a procedure says that, hey, we need to do internal audits 5 times a year. And when we look at what we did last year, it was 4 times a year. So my nonconformity statement is we are not doing internal audits as required by our internal procedure. So the evidence would be you showcasing that you are, in fact, not doing the audits as they're prescribed in your procedure. So stating the evidence would be like, I looked at all of the reports that were written last year for internal audits, and there are only 4 reports. In fact, the 5th one was never done. And the reference would be, well, where are you taking this from? You're saying it's a nonconformance. So where does this actually come from? Okay, well, this comes from the procedure that says on this line, on this specific line, maybe section 7.4.5 on your procedure, that we're supposed to be doing internal audits 5 times a year. And last year we only did them 4 times. And these were the reports that were reviewed. So that is pinpointing precisely, and you have to be explicit about that. This is exactly the section of the of the procedure that states this is what I need to do, but we found that we've been doing something different. Good. So let's talk about major versus minor nonconformities for a little bit. When you are doing an internal audit, this could also be, for instance, if you are subcontracting the activity to a contractor. So for instance, if you're saying, you know, we're too busy this year, we can't do our internal audits, we will subcontract internal audits to a consultant. So whether it's a consultant that's doing it for you or you're doing it for yourselves, you are not required to classify the type of nonconformance. However, even if you're not required to classify the type of nonconformance, it's still beneficial for you to classify them. And the reason I'm saying this is because it gives you more power to say, hey, we've got an issue. This is a systemic problem. If we do not rectify this, we could potentially find ourselves with a major during a regulatory audit, a customer audit, during a certification audit. So the way that we define a major nonconformance is a systemic breakdown of your management system. It's a shall that's not being implemented, or a must that is not being implemented. It's a number of small, minor nonconformances. So, for instance, you're having issues in documentation. Someone's using whiteout in production. And then you see that someone in kitting is also using whiteout. And then you go and you happen to find yourself in shipping, and you notice that the shipping department, they're using a pencil. So now we've got an issue as it relates to documentation. So because we have a number of small minors, this might indicate a larger systemic issue, and therefore this becomes a major nonconformance. We can also raise a major nonconformance if it's related to a high risk that an organization is doing nothing about. A minor nonconformance, on the other hand, is an isolated issue. This does not indicate a breakdown of the system. This might be a one-off. So I'm giving you the information because I'd rather you have the information that if you decided you want to classify, you can, but you're not obligated to classify. Good. Another area is where we're looking at conformance versus compliance. And these happen to be much like nonconformances and corrective actions, where people tend to confuse the two. When do I open one? When do I open the other? Most organizations I have seen that they will use conformance and compliance interchangeably. They're not meant to be used interchangeably. When we're talking about conformance, this is related to a standard. For instance, ISO 9001. So it's a requirement in the standard that is not being met. It could be due to a customer requirement that is not being met, or it could be due to an internal requirement that is not being met. The word compliance relates to legal requirements, regulatory requirements, Health Canada. So something that you should have done within the framework of Health Canada, within the regulatory requirements of Health Canada or the FDA, or something from your local bureau where you should be doing something as per the requirements of the city that you're in, but you're failing to do that. For instance, if you're in transport and we're transporting either through land, water, or sea, or rather land, sea, and air, a requirement that you're failing to meet, that too has compliance wrapped very tightly around it. So conformance, it's standard, customer, internal, and compliance is regulatory. That's the major distinction between the two. Good. So let's play a little bit of a game. We're going to do a couple more poll questions. So I want you to decide if each of the scenarios conform to the requirements of ISO 9001. And we'll have a very brief discussion on this as well. So here is the first one. So the auditor observes an operator using a caliper. So this is a measuring instrument to remove some shaving of the metal part coming out of the machine. When questioned about that, he said not to worry because the caliber was calibrated and he showed the sticker with a valid date. The auditor retrieved the record of calibration and saw that the calibration frequency was defined every 2 years. Is this a nonconformity? I'll give you guys some time to answer. Okay, let's see what you've answered. Absolutely, it's a nonconformance. For sure, it's a nonconformance. You're using a caliper to shave off some shavings from a machine. you're not using the caliper in the method, in the way that it should be used. If I'm using it to shave off some shavings, I might be rendering my tool ineffective when it comes to measuring. So even if it's got a valid expiry date or recalibration date of in 2 years from now, I'm still not using the tool as it's meant for it to be used. And who knows, maybe now there is an intolerance or that it's reading off. Here is the second scenario. A tape measure is used to rough measure the approximate distance between cutters in the saw cutting area. This tape measure is not used to measure any product, only to set up the cutter. Using the standard, must this tape measure be calibrated? What do you think? I'll give you guys a few more seconds to answer. That's right. The answer is no. If all you need is to set up your cutter, for instance, and you're looking at a distance separating, let's say, one line to another, you're not using the data, you're not using the quantitative measurement as a specification to report into a certificate of analysis that you're going to be providing a client. In this case, no, you are not required to have it calibrated. There's some organizations that might say, you know what, Sabrina, over here, anyone can use a tape measure. So we want to make sure that everything's calibrated, regardless if they're measuring the distance between two lines, if they're measuring the distance between two cutters or two pieces of equipment, or if we're measuring in order, because it's something we need to measure that we need to be able to report on a certificate of analysis. We want everything calibrated. In that case, that's part of your system. But in the prospect of scenario 2, it is not a non-conformance. It's perfectly okay. Let's look at the next one. The auditor complained that the gauges were identified only with the serial number and not a sticker indicating expiry dates for calibration. The gauges are, however, traceable to a certificate of calibration. Did the auditor find a nonconformity according to the standard? What do you think?
Sabrina, could you read that question again?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem. Let me go to it. I hope I'm not gonna change.
Yeah, don't move this slide because then people can't.
Yeah.
That's okay.
No, I will read it. I'll read it. Hang on a second. No problem. That might
Guys,
be
I just want to say thank you all for participating in our poll questions. It makes things so much more interactive and fun. So thanks, everyone.
So hang on a second. So again, for those of you, the auditor complained that the gauges were identified only with the serial number and not a sticker indicating expiry dates for calibration. The gauges are, however, traceable to a certificate of calibration. So there is traceability. Did the auditor find a nonconformity? No, the auditor, in fact, did not find the non-conformance. So there's really no need for stickers if records of calibration are available and they're traceable. Now, if your system says that all pieces of equipment need to have that sticker, in that case, yes, it's a non-conformance, but it's a non-conformance according to your policies and your procedures, not according to the ISO 9001 standard. Good. Excellent. Okay, scenario number 4. The management review process was reviewed during the audit, and the following was noted. There is no evidence that the following areas were reviewed during the management review: status of product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measurement results, and the results of internal audits. Is the following a non-conformance? Yes or no? I have a little bit more than half. Let's try to get a couple more answers in. Good. Very nice, very nice. Keep them coming. Excellent. So yes, it is in fact a non-conformance. Very good. So there needs to be, I mean, there's a couple of things that's wrong over here, right? You need to identify why is someone, first of all, does a person have training? But if they had training, then chances are they may not have had that non-conformance. So if they're not trained, why is a person who is not trained carrying out management reviews? So this is in fact a non-conformance. Very good. Well done. This brings us into the second part, into corrective actions. So what is a corrective action? Well, this is a systematic and it's a deliberate measures. So these are systematic and deliberate measures that are taken to address and to eliminate the fundamental root cause of an identified nonconformance or event and to prevent them from reoccurring again. Within the context of a QMS, such as 9001, corrective actions are critical for maintaining and improving the quality of the products that we produce, the services that we offer, and our overall processes. Okay? So, key aspects of corrective actions. And again, you'll notice that I have some sections. I have section 2 and another section on the next slide, section 6. These are grayed out. You're not required, it's recommended, but you're not required to include risk in your corrective actions. Personally, I love using risk in my corrective actions because I get to state the event that occurred. So for instance, your section 1 is a description of the nonconformity, the event that occurred, and the immediate action. So this is where you record all the details about what occurred, about what happened. The second section, as I'm suggesting, says, well, what is the risk? What's the risk to the business? What is the risk, the overall risk of the event, of it happening? What's the impact that it's going to have within our organization? So I like showing this because when I identify the root cause and I put my corrective action in place, and then eventually I do an effectiveness check, then I can re-evaluate risk again. And what we're hoping to see is that there is something comparable from section 2. So this is pre the corrective action. Post corrective action, the risk number, your risk priority number should have decreased. That is what we're hoping to see. And that is a quantitative method or way of analyzing risk and analyzing the effectiveness of what we just finished implementing. So, just so we are aware, there is an entire webinar that is that addresses root cause analysis and how to perform them. But one thing that I want to that I like to bring forward and talk to you about: don't determine the method for root cause analysis. This, I mean, to figure out, to do an investigation, to identify or do a root cause analysis, this can be done by so many ways. There's so many tools out there available. You can make mention of some of them, but for instance, if someone doesn't feel comfortable using an FMEA, don't have them just use FMEA just because that's something you're comfortable with. If they feel comfortable using a fishbone diagram and you still have an output at the end of the exercise, then have them use the fishbone diagram. There are several ways that we can get to a root cause. We might have a different output in the analysis, but it doesn't matter, because in the effectiveness check, if we see that things remained unchanged, well, then we go back to the drawing board. You can consider almost corrective actions like research. You find a method, you try different things, and if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, it's okay. You can go back to the drawing board and maybe either bring in different people to the proverbial table to help determine the root cause, or maybe just entirely use a different method. It's up to you. Okay. So this is what I'm suggesting a corrective action request or corrective action report might look like. So corrective actions are an essential component of continuous improvement, and they help organizations maintain compliance and conformance with regulatory requirements, with standards, with customer requirements, and with internal requirements, all to help improve operational efficiency and enhance customer satisfaction. Because at the end of the day, we want repeat business, and it's important that our customers are satisfied. So I want you to consider scenario 4. So this is our little individual who carried out a management review where certain areas, for instance, the status of product regulatory compliance was missed, previous management review results were missed, the monitoring and measurement results were missed, and the results of internal audits were missed. I want you to think about this, okay? So determine whether or not the issue raised is effectively addressed. So the nonconformity statement is that the management review process is ineffective. That's the statement. The evidence, there is no evidence that the following were reviewed during the management review: the status of product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measurement results, and internal audit results. The reference in this case is the standard section 9.3, as well as the reference of the internal procedure, if one exists. So you might have a procedure, an internal procedure that states this is what needs to be addressed during a management review. You can reference more than one thing. It doesn't just have to be the standard. It could be the standard. It could be a regulatory requirement as well. It could be a customer requirement and internal requirements. Root cause. Management reviews are being conducted without an agenda because the person conducting them was not aware of the ISO 9001 requirements for management review. So key on to the fact that the individual who's carrying this out is unaware. This is a corrective action taken, and this is what I want you to evaluate. A proper agenda for management review was developed and will be used from now on. My question to you is the following: Is the issue raised effectively addressed? So the way that they've decided to mitigate this, or the way what they decided to put in place, is that, okay, well, we'll just do a proper agenda for management review next time. What are your thoughts? Get a couple more of you to answer. Okay, let's see what you've said. That is exactly correct. It is not properly addressed. So there's a couple of things wrong with this, right? I mean, you might say that an agenda might be important, so this might be something you want to include. But fundamentally, we want to know, well, why is there someone who isn't trained, doesn't understand, or doesn't have the fundamentals of the fundamental knowledge of the standard? Why are they the ones that are spearheading the management review? These are some of the questions you might want to raise. So being that these are some of the questions that are coming up, this has to be addressed as well. And it has to be addressed in the action plan. So for instance, what might this look like? So we might have, so this is filling out an action plan or a corrective action request, okay? So we describe the nonconformity. So we have all of the details in the header. We describe the nonconformity in section 1. We have the management review process is ineffective. There's no evidence that the following was reviewed during the management review. Status of product, regulatory compliance, the previous management review results, monitoring and measurement of results, and finally the results of the internal audits. So your immediate action is address the nonconformance. So what are you going to do? You're going to document an addendum to address the following: the status of product regulatory compliance, previous management review results, monitoring and measurement of results, and the results of internal audits. You are going to immediately address the nonconformance, the nonconformity. The second section is where we're looking at the risk. So in this case, I determined that the risk is a 25 because this will likely happen again, seeing that there is a lack of structure. I couldn't fit everything in one slide, so you're going to have to bear with me. There's a couple slides here. Section 3, I decided, because I'm the one who completed this, I decided I was going to do a 5 whys analysis. This is one of the methods of root cause. Like you see in parentheses, you can use 5 whys, fishbone, etc. Leave it for people to determine what they feel comfortable using. So over here, finally, we figured out that management reviews are being conducted with no agenda because the person setting the reviews was not aware of the ISO 9001 requirements for management review. So after having done a 5 whys analysis, this is what we found. Section 4, what's your corrective action plan? So this is using the output of section 3 to determine what are the steps that you're going to follow, who is it that you're assigning it to, and you'll notice that there's people's names there. That's what you should be using. Don't use job titles, because you run the risk if there's more than one person with that same job title. Oh, but I thought that person was taking care of it. Oh, well, I thought that person was taking care of it. This happens to be one of the only times where we start to mention people's names. The due date, you can speak in terms of actual date, like the 7th of August, or the month and the year, or in terms of quarters. And then you have the closure date. So this is when that section or that action has been completed. Your effectiveness check, I might decide, because it's a management review, if I'm hosting management reviews on an annual basis, I might do my effectiveness check the following year. And then based on that information, or based on the information I find from the effectiveness check, I will then do a risk analysis to determine what is my risk after having implemented my action plan. So how do we evaluate effectiveness? Review the nonconformity description, review the root cause, ensure that the corrective action proposed addresses the problem and the root cause, verify that the corrective action is implemented, and finally, you want to verify that the corrective action has prevented the nonconformity. This might require a waiting period. Like I mentioned in this previous example that we just looked at together, being that it's a management review, if my management system does management reviews on an annual basis, I might have to wait a year. Awesome. Cindy, on to you, my dear.
Hi, guys. Hi, Sabrina. That was awesome. That was a great presentation. And it was really cool to have the interaction, like I said before, with the poll questions. So let's keep doing that because that was fabulous.
Awesome.
So this session, among many other webinars and all kinds of different content, is going to be available at our YouTube channel. You can see the URL there, or you can just scan the, what is that called again? The QR code. But we are always adding content. There's a search bar there, so you can search on any topic that you might be interested in. It's a really great resource. I did want to also comment, we do offer a whole range of training through SGS Academy, and we just wanted to share some information on some upcoming training classes. We run the ISO 9001 training about twice a month. So there's a lot of opportunities to join us for that. If you have any questions, please reach out to Sabrina or myself. There is our contact information. And again, some other social media that we have out there, and our website for the certification side. So we don't have too much time left, unfortunately, but I did want to get to a couple of questions if we could. So this is a good one. Is there a standardization for coding nonconformances and corrective action? Is there like a standardized defect code list or some other tool that works that way, Sabrina?
As it relates to 9001, I haven't seen any. There may be in other industry, but this is also, it's a very good question. It's a question I'd have to look a little bit deeper in. I'm not sure if any of the other industries or any of the other standards might have something standardized. I'd have to do a bit more digging, but I think you have the contact information of this individual. So what I'll do is I'll do some digging and I'll provide you more insight if I have any. That's a very good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. So this is just a kind of goofy, but what is the most number or highest number of nonconformances that you ever documented during an audit?
Oh my God. Not the question you want to ask. Okay, so there was a pharma audit that I had done a little while ago, but there was just it was a pharma audit, yes, but it was a section that they were ISO 9001. By the time I was done that audit, they had something ridiculous, like 24 majors. They had probably just as many minors. At that point, I told them, I'm like, I don't think I can give you a certificate. Like, these are the risk was high enough that it required us to pull out and to suspend the certification for a period of time, at least until they got certain things up and running properly. And then I had gone back to close them off. But it was quite a large number. But and this is actually another point I wanted to bring up. Just because you have majors, just because you have minors, I mean, all depending on the context, obviously, this does not mean that an auditor is just going to come in to take out your certificate or to ask for it back. There are a lot of things that go that feed into this. So for instance, if you're a delinquent, there's majors that were raised and you're not closing them off. Miners that time and time again, they're falling through the cracks. In this case, we might have grounds for, like you're not serious about maintaining the certification, so we'll suspend it. But it's really happens on rare occasions. Like they really have to be exceptional occasions for us to suspend or even just remove the certification entirely.
We're just wondering how mean you are. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not mean, I'm fair.
You're thorough.
I'm thorough and fair.
So, guys, we're going to ask one more question. We are at the top of the hour. So if you have to leave, please note that you will receive an email with a link to the recording so you can view it, you can share it. And we really do appreciate if you have to leave right now, but you'll get that probably next Monday or Tuesday. And please do, if you have time, click through our survey. We would really appreciate your feedback on this session. If you have other topics that you're interested in, and if you'd like one of us to reach out to you, you can just let us know. So Sabrina, I'm sorry, one more question. Could you talk a bit more about the concept of unplanned deviations that you mentioned earlier?
Okay, so deviation is an interesting word because it's also used as a synonym for nonconformance. But the thing is, we need to think about the type of deviation. We have what we call our planned deviations and unplanned deviations. Unplanned deviations are non-conformances because you did not plan. A planned deviation is a little bit different. A planned deviation is, I am aware that I am not going to be following this procedure. I am aware that we're going to be doing this instead. These are the measures that we have taken to safeguard the product, to safeguard the process, to make sure that everything still follows as it's meant for it to follow, and that we are still controlling the system. So for instance, this might look like if I have a situation with a walk-in refrigerator, with a chiller, for instance. I am planning to do maintenance. So all of my products that are in the refrigerator are being now warehoused in another area between 2 to 8 degrees Celsius that's equally mapped, and it's just going to be staged there for the time being while the people that are doing preventative maintenance on the chiller get that up and running again. So that would be an example of a planned deviation. In this case, I'm planning for it, so it's not a nonconformance. Nonconformances are unplanned deviation. It's I deviated from the protocol for whatever reason. The root cause analysis will tell you what happened. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Sabrina. We are running over a little bit. So folks, if we did not reply to your questions, you will receive a follow-up email from either myself or from Sabrina directly with a response. Again, please complete our survey. Please join us again for the next webinar. I believe we're on for November 1st. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. So you'll get some info about that, and hopefully you'll be joining us then. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and a fantastic weekend.
Enjoy, everyone.